my dear students, welcome to Teacher at Home. Today class we are going to learn the first chapter, Challenges of Nation Building. Challenges for the new nation. All the At the hour of the midnight on 15 August 1947, India attained independence. Jawaharlal Nehru, the first person, Prime Minister of Free India, addressed a special speech addressed a special session of the Constituent Assembly that night. This was the famous Tyrus with Destiny speech that you are familiar with. That was the moment Indians had been waiting for. You had read in your history textbooks that there were many voices in our national movement, but there were two goals almost everyone agreed upon. One, that after independence we shall run our country through democratic government, and two, that the government will be run for the good of all, particularly the poor and the socially disadvantaged groups. Now that the country was independent, the time had come to realize the promise of freedom. This was not going to be easy. India was born in very difficult circumstances. Perhaps no other country by then was born in a situation more difficult than that of India in 1947. Freedom came with the partition of the country. The year 1947 was a year of unprecedented violence and trauma of displacement. It was in this situation that independent India started on its journey to achieve several objectives. Yet the turmoil that accompanied the independence did not make our leaders lose sight of the multiple challenges that faces a new nation. The Hindustan Times end of 200-year-old British rule in India. That is from the newspapers. Three challenges. Broadly independent India faced three kinds of challenges. The first and the immediate challenge was to shape a nation that was united, yet accommodative of the diversity in our country. India was a land of continental size and diversity. Its people spoke different languages and followed different cultures and religions. At that time, it was widely believed that a country full of such kinds of diversity could not remain together for long. The partition of the country appeared to prove everyone's worst fears. There were serious questions about the future of India. Would India survive as a unified country? Would it do so by emphasizing national unity at the cost of every other objective? Would it mean rejecting all regional and subnational identities? And there was an urgent question: how was integration of the territory of India to be achieved? The second challenge was to establish democracy. You have already studied the Indian Constitution. You know that the Constitution granted fundamental rights and extended the right to vote to every citizen. India adopted representative democracy based on the parliamentary form of government. These features ensure that the political competition would take place in a democratic framework. A democratic constitution is a necessary but not sufficient for establishing a democracy. The challenge was to develop democratic practices in accordance with the constitution. The third challenge was to ensure the development and well being of the entire society and not only of some sections. Here again, the Constitution clearly laid down the principles of equality and special protection of socially disadvantaged groups and religious and cultural communities. The Constitution also set out in the directive principles of state policy the welfare goals that democratic politics must achieve. The real challenge now was to evolve Effective policies for democratic economic development and eradication of poverty. How did independent India respond to the challenges? To what extent did India succeed in achieving the various objectives set out by the Constitution? The book is an attempt to respond to these questions. The book tells the story of politics in India since independence so as to equip you to develop your own answers to big questions like this. In the first three chapters, we look at how the three challenges mentioned above were faced in the early years after independence. In this chapter, we focus on the first challenge of nation building that occupied center stage in the years immediately after independence. We begin by looking at the events that formed the context of independence. This can help us to understand why the issue of national unity and security became a primary challenge at the time of independence. We shall then see how India chose to shape itself into a nation united by a shared history and common destiny. This unity had to reflect the aspirations of people across the different regions and deal with the disparities that existed among regions and different sections of people. In the next two chapters, we shall turn to the challenge of establishing a democracy and achieving economic development with equality and justice. These three stamps were issued in 1950 to mark the first Republic Day of 26 January 1950. What do the images of the stamp tell you about the challenges of the new republic? Then, paper cuttings, the dam of freedom. Why so much price? This cat, mad brightness, this bidden by night dawn. The one that was awaited, surely this is not that dawn. This is not the dawn yearning for which had we set our friends hoping to find some time. Somewhere the final destination of stars in the wideness of the sky. Somewhere at least must be a shore for the languid waves of the night. Somewhere at least must anger the sad bout of the heart. Faiz Ahmad Faiz, born in Sialkot, stayed in Pakistan after partition. He leftist in his political leanings. He opposed the Pakistani regime and was imprisoned. Collections of his poetry include Naksh-e Faryadi, Dasti Saba, and Zindanama, regarded as one of the greatest poets of South Asia in the 20th century. We should begin to work in the spirit and in of course of time all these angularities of the majority and minority communities, the Hindu community and the Muslim community, because even as regards Muslims, you have Pathans, Punjabis, Shias, Sunnis, and so on. Among the Hindus, you will have Brahmins, Vaishnavas, Kshatriyas, and Bengalis, Madrasis, and so on will vanish. You are free and you are free to go to the temples, you are free to go to the mosque, or any other place of worship in the state of Pakistan. You may belong to any religion or caste or creed. That has nothing to do with the business of the state. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, presidential address to the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan at Karachi in 11th August 1947. Next, again a paper cutting, Birth of India's Freedom, Nation walks to new life, wakes to new life. Mr. Nehru calls for big effort from police. Today I call Where Shah. Amrita Pridham. Today I call Where Shah. Speak from your grave. And turn today the book of love's next affectionate page. Once a daughter of Punjab cried, and you wrote a wailing saga. Today a million of daughters cry to you. Where is Shah? Rise. O narrator of the grieving, rise. Look at your Punjab. Today fields are lined with corpses and blood fills the Chenab. Someone has mixed poison in the 5 rivers flow. Their deadly water is now irrigating our land's gale. This fertile land is sprouting venom from every pore. The sky is turning red from endless cries of gore. The toxic forest wind screams from inside. Speak up, turning each fruit's bamboo shoot in a deadly snake. Translation of an extract from Punjabi poem Akan Varisha Nan, Amrita Preetham, a prominent Punjabi poet and fiction writer, recipient of Sahitya Akademi Award, Padma Shri and Jnanapith Award. After partition, she made Delhi her second home. She was active in writing and editing Nagmani, a Punjabi monthly magazine, till her loss. We have a Muslim minority who are so large in numbers that they cannot even, if they want, go anywhere else. This is a fact, basic fact, about which there can be no argument. Whatever the provocation from Pakistan, and whatever the indignities and horrors inflicted on non-Muslims there, we have got to deal with this minority in a civilized manner. We must give them security and the rights of the citizen in a democratic state. If we fail to do so, we shall have festering score which will eventually poison the whole body politic and probably destroy it. Partition, displacement, and rehabilitation. On 14-15 August 1947, not one but two nation states came into existence, India and Pakistan. This was a result of partition, the division of British India into India and Pakistan. The drawing of the border demarcating the territory of each country marked the culmination of political developments that you have read about in the history textbooks. According to the two nation theory advanced by the Muslim League, India consisted of not one but two people, Hindus and Muslims. That is why it demanded Pakistan, a separate country for the Muslims. The Congress opposed the theory and the demand for Pakistan. But several political developments in 1940s, the political competition between the Congress and the Muslim League and the British rule led to the decisions for the creation of Pakistan. Process of partition. Thus, it was decided that what was still then known as India would be divided into two countries, India and Pakistan. Such a division was not only very painful but also very difficult to decide and to implement. It was decided to follow the principle of religious majorities. This basically means that areas where the Muslims were in majority would make up the territory of Pakistan. The rest was to stay with India. The idea might appear simple, but it presented all kinds of difficulties. First of all, there was no single belt of Muslim majority areas in British India. There were two areas of concentration, one in the west and one in the east. There was no way that these two parts would be joined. So it was decided that the new country, Pakistan, will compromise two territories, West and East Pakistan, separated by a long expanse of Indian territory. Secondly, not all Muslim majority areas wanted to be in Pakistan. Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the undisputed leader of the northwestern frontier province and known as Frontier Gandhi, was staunchly opposed to the two nation theory. Eventually, his voice was simply ignored, and the NWFP was made to merge with Pakistan. The third problem was the two of the Muslim majority provinces of British India, Punjab and Bengal, had very large areas where the non Muslims were in majority. Eventually, it was decided that these two provinces would be bifurcated according to the religious majority at the district or even lower level. The decision could be made by the midnight of 14-15 August. It meant that a large number of the people did not know on the day of independence whether they were in India or in Pakistan. The partition of the two provinces caused the deepest trauma of partition. This was related to the fourth and the most intractable of all the problems of partition. This was the problem of minorities on both sides of the border. Lakhs of Hindus and Sikhs in the areas they were now in Pakistan and was equally the number of Muslims on the Indian state of Punjab and Bengal, and to some extent the Indian surrounding areas found themselves stuck. They were to discover that they were undesirable aliens in their own home. In the land were where they and their ancestors had lived for centuries. As soon as it became clear that the country was going to be partitioned, the minorities on both sides targets of attack. No one had quite anticipated the scale of its problem. No one had any plans for handling this. Initially, the people and political leaders kept hoping that this violence was temporary and would be controlled soon. Very soon, the violence went out to control. The minorities on both sides of the border were left with no option except to leave their homes, often at a few hours' notice. Consequences of partition. The year 1947 was the year of one of the largest, most abrupt, unplanned, and tragic transfer of population that human history has known. There were killings and atrocities on both sides of the border. In the name of religion, people of one community ruthlessly killed and maimed people of the other community. Cities like Lahore, Amritsar, Kolkata became divided into communal zones. Muslims would avoid going into area where mainly Hindus or Sikhs lived. Similarly, the Hindus and Sikhs stayed away from the areas of Muslim predominance. Forced to abandon their homes and move across borders, people went through immense sufferings. Minorities on both sides of the border fled their home and often secured temporary shelter in refugee camps. They often found unhelpful local administration and police in what was still recently their own country. They traveled to the other side of the new border by all sorts of means, often by foot. Even during this journey, they were often attacked, killed, or raped. Thousands of women were abducted on both sides of the border. They were made to convert to the religion of the abductor and were forced to the marriage. In many cases, women were killed by their own family members to preserve the family honor. Many children were separated from their parents. Those who had managed to cross the border found that they had no home. For lakhs of the refugees, the country's freedom meant life in refugee camps for months and sometimes for years. Writers, poets, and filmmakers in India and Pakistan have expressed the ruthlessness of the killings and the suffering of displacement and violence in their novels, short story, poems, and films. While recounting the trauma of partition, they had often used the phrase that the survivors themselves used to describe partition as a division of heart. A partition was not merely a division of properties, liabilities, and assets, or a political division of the country and administrative apparatus. What also got divided were the financial assets and the things like tables, chairs, typewriters, paper clips, books, and also musical instruments of the police band. The employees of the government and the railways were also divided. Above all, it was a violent separation of communities who had hitherto lived together as neighbors. It is estimated that the partition forced about 80 lakh people to migrate across the new border. Between 10 to 10 lakh people were killed in partition related violence. Beyond the administrative concerns and financial strains, however, the partition posed another deeper issue. The leaders of the Indian national struggle did not believe in the two nation theory, and that partition on religious basis had taken place. Did they make India a Hindu nation automatically? Even after large scale immigration of Muslims to the newly created Pakistan, the Muslim population in India accounted for 12% of the total population in 1951. So, how would this government of India treat its Muslim citizens and other religious minorities? Sikhs, Christians, Jains, Buddhists, Parsis, and Jews. The partition already created severe conflict between the two communities. There were competing political interests behind these conflicts. The Muslim Leagues was formed to protect the interests of the Muslims in colonial India. It was in the forefront of the demand for a separate Muslim nation. Similarly, there were organizations which were trying to organize the Hindus in order to turn India into a Hindu nation. But most leaders of the national movement believed that India must treat persons of all religions. Salim Mirza, a shoemaker, shoe manufacturer in Agra, increasingly find himself a stranger. Amid the people he was lived with all his life. He felt lost in the emerging reality after partition. His business suffers, and a refugee from the other side of partition India occupies his ancestral dwelling. His daughter, too, has a tragic end. He believes that things would soon be normal again. But many of his family members decided to move to Pakistan. Salim is torn between an impulse to move out to Pakistan and an urge to stay back. A decisive moment comes when Salim witnesses a student's processions demanding fair treatment from the government. His son, Sikandar, has joined the procession. Can you imagine what Mr. Salim finally did? Mahatma Gandhi's sacrifice. On the 15th August 1947, Mahatma Gandhi did not participate in any of the Independence Day celebration. He was in Kolkata, in the areas which were torn by the gruesome riots between Hindus and Muslims. He was saddened by the communal violence and disheartened that the principles of ahimsa, non-violence, and satyagraha, active but non-violent resistance, that he had lived and worked for, had failed to bind the people in troubled times. Gandhiji went on to persuade the Hindus and Muslims to give up violence. His presence in Kolkata greatly improved the situation, and the coming of independence was celebrated in the spirit of communal harmony with joyous dancing in the street. Gandhiji prayer meetings attracted large crowds, but this was short-lived at riots between Hindus and Muslims erupted once again, and Gandhiji had to restore to as fast as to bring peace. Next month, Gandhiji moved to Delhi, where large-scale violence had erupted. He was deeply concerned about ensuring that Muslims should be allowed to stay in India with dignity as equal citizens. He was also concerned about the relations between India and Pakistan. He was unhappy with what he saw as the Indian government decision not to honor his financial commitments to Pakistan. With all this in mind, he undertook what turned out to be his last fast in January 1948. As in Kolkata, his fast had a dramatic effect in Delhi. Communal tension and violence reduced. Muslims of Delhi and surrounding areas could safely return to their homes. The government of India agreed to give Pakistan its dues. Gandhiji's actions were, however, not liked by all. Extremists in both the communities blamed him for their conditions. Despite this, he continued to meet everyone during his prayer meetings. Finally, on 30th January 1948, one such extremist, Nathuram Vinay Godse, walked up to Gandhiji during his evening prayer in Delhi and fired three bullets at him, killing him instantly. Thus ended a lifelong struggle for truth, non-violence, justice, and tolerance. Chief Commissioner's Office, Delhi. Equally, and that India should not be a country that gave superior status to adherents of one faith and inferior to those who practiced another religion. All citizens would be equal irrespective of their religious affiliation. Being religious or a believer would not be a test of citizenship. They cherished, therefore, the ideal of a secular nation. This ideal was enshrined in the Indian constitution. Sweda noticed that her Nana would get very quiet whenever anyone mentioned Pakistan. One day, she decided to ask him about it. Her Nana told her about how he moved from Lahore to Ludhiana during partition. Both his parents were killed. Even he would not have survived, but a neighboring Muslim family gave him shelter and kept him in hiding for several days. They helped him find some relatives, and that is how he managed to cross the border and start a new life. Have you heard a similar story? Ask your grandparents or anyone of that generation about their memories of Independence Day, about the celebration, about the trauma of partition, about the expectation they had from independence. Integration of princely states. British India was divided into what were called the British Indian provinces and the princely states. The British Indian provinces were directly under the control of the British government. On the other hand, several large and small states ruled by princes, called the princely states, enjoyed some form of control over their internal affairs as long as they accepted British supremacy. This was called paramountcy or suzerainty of the British crown. Princely states covered one third of the land area of the British Indian Empire, and one out of their four Indians lived under princely rule. The problem: just before the independence, it was announced by the British that end of their rule over India, paramountcy of the British crown over princely states would also lapse. This means that all the states, as many 565 in all, would become legally independent. The British government took the view that all the states were free to join either India or Pakistan or remain independent if they so wished. This decision was left not to the people but to the princely rulers of these states. This was a very serious problem and could threaten the very existence of a united India. The problem started very soon. First of all, the ruler of Travancore announced that the state had decided on independence. The Nizam, India before and after partition, of Hyderabad, made a similar announcement the next day. Rulers like the Nawab of Bhopal were averse of joining the Constituent Assembly. His response to the rulers of the princely states made that mean that after independence there was a very real possibility that India would get further divided into a number of small countries. The prospects of democracy for the people in the states also looked bleak. This was a strange situation since the Indian independence was aimed at unity, self determination, as well as democracy. In most of these princely states, governments were run in the non democratic manner, and the rulers were unwilling to give democratic rights to their populations. Government approach: the interim government took a firm stance against the possible division of India into small principalities of different sizes. The Muslim League opposed the Indian National Congress and took the view that the states should be free to adopt any course they liked. Sardar Patel was India's deputy prime minister and home minister during the crucial period immediately following independence. He played his historic role in negotiating with the rulers of the princely state firmly but diplomatically and bringing most of them into Indian union. It may took easy now, but it was a very complicated task which required skillful persuasion. For instance, there was 26 small states in today's Orissa, Saurashtra region of Gujarat, and had 14 big states, 119 small states, and numerous other different administration. The government approach was guided by three considerations. Firstly, the people of most of the princely states clearly wanted to become part of the Indian Union. Secondly, the government was prepared to be flexible in giving autonomy of some regions. This idea was to accommodate plurality and adopt a flexible approach in dealing with the demands of the regions. Thirdly, in the backdrop of partition, which brought into focus the contest over demarcation of territory, integration and consolidation of the territorial boundaries of the nation, and assumed the supreme importance. Before 15th August 1947, peaceful negotiations had brought almost all states whose territories were contiguous to the new boundaries of India into Indian Union. The rulers of most of the states signed a document called the Instrument of Accession, which means that their state agreed to become a part of the Union of India. Accession of the princely states of Junagadh, Hyderabad, Kashmir, Manipur proved more difficult than the rest. The issue of Junagadh was resolved after a plebiscite confirmed people's desire to join India. We'll read about Kashmir in chapter 8. Here, let us look at the cases of Hyderabad and Manipur. Challenges of nation building. Hyderabad. Sardar Patel with the Nizam of Hyderabad. Hyderabad, the largest of the princely state, was surrounded entirely by Indian territory. Some parts of the old Hyderabad state are today parts of Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh. The ruler carried the title Nizam, and he was one of the world's richest men. The Nizam wanted an independent status for Hyderabad. He entered into what was called the Standstill Agreement with India in November 1947. For a year, while negotiations with the Indian government were going on. In the meantime, the government of the movement of the people of Hyderabad state against the Nizam's rule gathered force. The peasantry in the Telangana region, in particular, was the victim of Nizam's oppressive rule and rose against him. Women who had seen the worst of this oppression joined the movement into large numbers. Hyderabad town and the nerve center of the movement. The Communists and the Hyderabad Congress were in the forefront of the movement. Nizam responded by unleashing a paramilitary force known as the Razakas on the people. Atrocities and communal nature of the Razakas knew no bounds. They murdered, maimed, raped, and looted, targeting particularly the non-Muslims. Central government had to order the army to tackle the situation. September 1948, Indian army moved into control into Nizam forces. After a few days of intermittent fighting, the Nizam surrendered. This led to Hyderabad accessions to India. Manipur. A few days before independence, the Maharaja of Manipur, Bodha Chandra Singh, signed the instrument of accession with the Indian government on the assurance of the internal autonomy of Manipur would be maintained. Under the pressure of public opinion, the Maharaja held elections in Manipur in June 1948, and the state became a constitutional monarchy. Thus, Manipur was the first place of India to hold election based on universal adult franchising. In the Legislative Assembly of Manipur, there were sharp differences over the question of merger of Manipur with India. While the state congress wanted the merger, other political parties were opposed to this. The government of India succeeded in pressurizing the Maharaja into signing of merger agreement in September 1949 without consulting the popularly elected Legislative Assembly of Manipur. This caused a lot of anger and resentment in Manipur, the repercussions of which are still being felt. Reorganization of states. The progress process of nation building did not come to an end with partition and integration of princely states. Now the challenge was to draw the internal boundaries of the Indian states. This was not just a matter of administrative divisions. The boundaries had to be drawn in a way so that the linguistic and cultural plurality of the country would be reflected without affecting the unity of the nation. During colonial rule, the country boundaries were drawn either on administrative convenience or simply coincided with the territories annexed by the British government or the territories ruled by the princely powers. Our national movement had reflected these divisions as artificial and had promised the linguistic principle as a basis of information on state. In fact, after the Nagpur sessions of Congress in 1920, the principle was reorganized, recognized, and the basis of reorganization of the Indian National Congress Party itself. Many provincial Congress committees were created by linguistic zones, which did not follow the administrative divisions of British India. Things changed after independence and partition. Our leaders felt that carving out states on the basis of language might lead to disruption and disintegration. It was also felt that this would draw attention away from other social and economic challenges that the country faced. Central leadership decided to postpone matters. The need for postponement was also felt because the fate of the princely states had not been decided. Also, the memory of partition was still fresh. These decisions of the national leadership was challenged by the local leaders and the people. Protests began in the Telugu speaking areas of the old Madras province, which included present day Tamil Nadu, parts of Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, and Karnataka. The Vishal Andhra movement, as the movement of the separate Andhra was called, demanded that the Telugu speaking areas should be separated from the Madras province, of which they were a part and be made into a separate Andhra province. Nearly All the political forces in the Andhra region were in favor of linguistic reorganization of the then Madras province. The movement gathered momentum as a result of central government's vacillation. For this Sri Ramalu, a Congress leader and a veteran Gandhian, went on the indefinite fast that led to his death after 56 days. This caused great unrest and resulted in violent outbursts in the Andhra region. People in large number took into the street. Many were injured or lost their lives in police firing. In Madras, several legislators resigned their seats in protest. Finally, the Prime Minister announced the formation of a separate Andhra state in December 1952. The formation of Andhra spurred the struggle for making out the states of linguistic lines into other parts of the country. The struggles forced the central government into appointing a State Reorganization Commission 1953 to look into the question of redrawing of the boundaries of states. Commission, in its report, accepted that the boundaries of the state should reflect the boundaries of different languages. On the basis of its report, the State Reorganization Act was passed in 1956. States and six union territories. One of the most important concerns in the early years was the demands of separate states would endanger the unity of the country. It was felt that linguistic states may foster separatism and create pressures on the newly founded nation. But the leadership, under popular pressures, finally made a choice in favor of the linguistic states. It was hoped that if you accept the regional and linguistic claims of all regions, the threat of division and separation would be reduced. Besides, the accumulation of the regional demands and the formation of linguistic states were also seen as more democratic. Now it is more than 50 years since the formation of the linguistic state. We can say that linguistic states and the moment of the formation of the states changed the nature of democratic politics, leadership in some basic ways. The path to politics and power was now open to people other than the small English speaking elite. Linguistic reorganization also gave some uniform basis of the drawing of state boundaries. It did not lead to disintegration of the country as many had feared earlier. On the contrary, it strengthened national unity. Above all, the linguistic state underlined acceptance of the principle of diversity. When we say that India adopted democracy, it may not simply mean that India embraced a democratic situation, nor does it merely mean that India adopted the format of elections. Choice was larger than that. It was a choice in favor of recognizing and accepting the existence of differences which could at times be oppositional. Democracy, in other words, was associated with plurality of ideas and ways of life. Many of the politics in the later period was to take place in this framework. So that's all about this chapter. If you're interested, please do like, share, and subscribe my channel. Okay, thank you.